Okay, so where to begin? Where to begin? All right, so this is going to sound very fake and rehearsed because I just said all this. But let me see if I can cover it from the beginning. So, what's up, everybody? Yeah, so this morning I went to walk my dog, and I've got like metal stairs, like a whole flight of metal stairs that I walk down, and it faces the metal stairs go down facing towards the east. And so I'm getting out the door. My dog's halfway down the stairs. She starts trying to run down the stairs, like, and I'm, shutting the door up and locking it. And anyway, take care of that. But I put my hand on the frickin' flight of stairs, and I couldn't hold it there for like a second. You could fry a frickin' egg on it, or like, I don't know, probably even fry a steak on it. So let's see here. I checked the weather is 95, I want to say. 93 feels like 106 with the UV heat index because, of course, the 93 is in the shade. So 106 feels like a little bit hot. And for those of you who are in the Celsius, it's 33 and 41. So one hell of a hot day. But isn't that odd? 33 is super hot day in Celsius. Right. So this is my first live stream in about 3 months, thanks to a community guideline strike, courtesy of, well, won't mention any names, but I know exactly who did it, getting, pushing porn on my live stream the last time I did one. And the last live stream I did was the first one I had done in 3 months for yet another community guideline strike, 2 of them actually from the whole not Sandy Hook, Boston bombing thing. So YouTube community guideline strike lasted 3 months for something that I had put out, something I had said, my opinions of like a long time ago, and they just sort of pull that out of a hat to keep me with one strike almost, it seems, one strike at all times. So that's the way YouTube really is going to dig its own grave in terms of a litigation standpoint, because and this sort of segues into the whole Bart Sibrel thing that I was going to mention. Bart Sibrel, everybody knows, has done some really great work with showing NASA fakery. Funny thing happened on the way to the moon. Astronauts gone wild. And so some of his videos have been instrumental in helping people to see that NASA is indeed faking things. However, of course, Bart Sibrel is he doesn't speak very highly of flat Earth or flat earthers. And a lot of people label him as a shill or a globe Earth troll for that. And, maybe he is. I don't know. I don't claim to know what Bart Sibrel's, where his heart lies. But what I believe is that it's impossible for him to comprehend that the systems of government and the hierarchy of science could be so fundamentally wrong about everything, as well as fundamentally deceptive when it comes to even other entities of NASA. He still believes in globe Earth and infinite space because the mind control programming programming to that end is extremely powerful, and it's difficult to penetrate that. And so if you're going to realize flat Earth, that's when you realize that these systems of government and science with a capital S, or theoretical alliance, you must come to the realization that they are either completely inept or completely corrupt. It's either one or the other. And some people, unfortunately, are just, it seems, are not capable of admitting that these hierarchies, the establishment, whether it's political or scientific establishment, could possibly be so fundamentally wrong or deceptive. And so from that aspect, I can totally understand how someone would go on believing in the ball, even when knowing NASA's lying. Because frankly, I think a lot of flat earthers may be just a couple of shades away from people who cling to the globe ad nauseum. Because if you refuse to actually admit to yourself that it's possible that NASA could be completely full of crap, and that even all of the government space agencies of the world could be totally deceptive, and all of science is wrong about so many things, starting with the Big Bang and ending with really evolution and everything in between. Until you can admit that, then you have to refuse to examine flat Earth critically, or better stated, refuse to examine the globe Earth critically. Because when you really examine the globe Earth hypothesis critically, it becomes absolutely crystal clear that it's just nonsense. It doesn't match any experience, observation, experiment, anything that you can possibly throw at it, whether it's observationally or experimentally. It all comes back with results that show a motionless plane Earth. But unfortunately, we're not necessarily dealing with logic here. We're dealing with people who were brought up mind controlled by things like Star Wars and NASA, which did a spectacular job of bridging the gap between theoretical science and perceived reality of the masses. Because taking a page out of the Third Reich's book, it appears that NASA, who was largely founded, or there was a large amount of influence on the fledgling NASA by literal Nazis, and it's really no surprise that they do these just totally deceptive things. However, it is in the name of and in support of this theoretical science that goes all the way back to Einstein and Copernicus, really. And unfortunately, this sort of stunt, or this long series of stunts by NASA, has really done a great job of firming that idea of infinite space and a spinning ball Earth in the minds of practically everyone in the modern, civilized world. And this sort of subliminal programming goes extremely deep. I mean, you see it in all sorts of logos, from like the Universal Pictures Company to, I mean, Firefox, right? I mean, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And subliminal programming is extremely powerful. I mean, when you study the links to which advertisers and other propagandists who want to convince people of something, whatever that thing is, whether it's to buy a product or to buy into a theory, um, that they go at your subconscious. Because most of our decisions on a daily basis are not made consciously, whether we like to admit it or not. For every decision that we make, thousands of subconscious sort of systems protocol checks are run before we make that conscious decision. And if you can worm your way into large masses of people's subconscious mind, then it's possible to really convince them of anything. And it's extremely difficult to break that programming. I would say, frankly, it's a miracle that it can be done, because the amount of programming that has gone into the globe Earth is really, there's second to none. I mean, I believe it is the most profound, widely publicized psychological operation in history. And I think that fake space, whether it, not specifically the moon landings, fakery, but fake space in general is definitely the largest conspiracy ever. But then you get people who, naysayers, they say, well, Bill Clinton, the president, couldn't keep a sloppy handshake secret in the Oval Office. And of course, that the person who says that has obviously never seen or looked into the Clinton murders. Just dozens of people in a position to damage the Clintons, either reputation or politically or legally, wind up murdered, and the coroner ends up, calling it an accidental death or a suicide when it clearly couldn't have been. So to say that he didn't get away with anything in the Oval Office because they used this stunt of Monica Lewinsky in the press to get him impeached legally, that was merely a stunt. I mean, it goes back to the whole wags the dog thing. But the point is, when you've got a group of sworn liars, because whether you like it or not, Freemasonry, even the people who are, blue lodgers that don't know anything about the hierarchy's strategy or agenda, the convenient scapegoat facade for the evil that actually lies within the hierarchy of Freemasonry, these Blue Lodge initiates will attest to how Freemasonry is merely a philanthropic organization that helps them to get better deals or contracts or whatever, or it's just a men's club. But all of them, even them, are sworn to secrecy. That they go through blood oaths where they literally put a noose around their neck and swear that if they divulge the lodge secrets, then they will be killed. And whether that actually happens, historically it appears that it has happened, and they mock us every time you drink a Captain Morgan, right? That all goes back to Captain Morgan, who was allegedly assassinated by brother Freemasons for writing a book about the inner workings of the craft. And so, it doesn't make a lot of sense that people would go killing Freemasons who come out of the lodge and say, yeah, it's pretty weird. They rolled my pant leg up and they put a noose around my neck. But that isn't the extent of the weird things that they do. That's just the extent of the weird things that the initiate knows that they do. And so while such people have a plausible deniability, when you get up the rung of Freemasonry, it truly does appear, and there is historical factual evidence that our system of government, for example, was put in place by predominantly Freemasons and secret societies. This group definitely does have long-term plans and the power to implement those plans, and that power doesn't appear to be going away anytime soon, as long as things continue going the way they've been going, right? But man, I need to get something to drink. Oh, I got some lemonade. 1 second. Sorry. Even the Freemasons at the bottom of this pyramid of power, the structure of Freemasonry, are sworn to secrecy. And so when you get up to the higher levels, people that probably have dirt, the Freemasons will use blackmail and honey traps and extortion even to prevent people from talking. And of course, the blood oaths and all of the grand and great riches that come your way for being in on any of their devious plans, right? These conspiracies. So the idea that anybody from NASA would go on the record and, say that they're faking space, I don't see it as that big of a problem. I really don't, because only a few people need to know about it, and that would probably include most of the astronauts. But statistically speaking, you wouldn't need that many people to perpetuate this hoax. And of course, they have the money to go and purchase things like architects and engineers who design and actually build these craft and spend a lot of money and time on these craft that are supposed to go in orbit in space. But just because you build such a thing does not necessarily mean that it's going to space or it's going to the destinations where you say they're going. But this just brings me all the way back to Bart Sibrel. For some people, perhaps it's impossible to realize that, yes, NASA is completely deceptive. Yes, these institutions of science, like even astronomy, are completely wrong in their presumption. And that's the biggest hurdle for people to overcome. And that's even people who are interested in the topic. Many people are not even interested enough in this sort of thing and whether or not the Earth is a ball to even have the conversation, because it doesn't immediately affect their lives. And so, I suppose that as long as the presents keep coming, such people wouldn't mind believing in Santa Claus their entire life. As long as the presents are under the tree every Christmas, then that's fine. As long as it's good for me, as long as it doesn't affect my little situation, right? Then it's fine. I don't mind being deceived. And frankly, I think that's ridiculous because if you do go and study into subliminal programming and mind control, the people who are mind controlling their victims, they want you to be in conflict with your core belief systems. So they want you to believe something, but then on the other hand, you understand that it couldn't be true. So, like for example, um, they tell, well, I don't know about a good example, but they tell historical stories. Let's say um, Christ, for example. This is just my opinion. They say he walked on water. He born of a virgin, and oh, and by the way, he resurrected. So what I believe is that Christ was a healer and resurrected, but some of the tales about walking on water and these sort of it almost seems like esoteric retellings of ancient um, paganistic stories, really, that are interwoven into the Christian narrative by the Roman Catholic Church, really. However, even now, the Protestant churches have agreed to use that sort of King James version. When, the books of Christianity, there were dozens of them, dozens and dozens of them that were hand selected. Just several out of dozens were hand selected for the King James version, and I have good faith to believe that those were altered in substantial ways. And so it just seems to me like when you tell a story that seems too fantastic to believe, then the true parts of it, or the parts that resonate with me as true, seem to become part of this big fishtail, right? So if Christ was a healer that did amazing things like heal the blind, and what techniques he used, it doesn't say in the Bible. It just says that he did it. But there's also a good chunk of Jesus's life that was left out of the Bible. And so, it makes a lot of sense that when he was gone from Scripture, he was learning things from different kind of monks in the East, perhaps. And when you look at things like the Gospel of Thomas, which is fairly recently discovered in several different locations at once, so it does seem to be very old, very original, and very credible. The Gospel of Thomas has none of the narrative of the common contemporary Christian accounts that are often used by zeitgeist theorists to say that Christianity is just a retelling of this Saturnalia stuff, right? Um, but in fact, uh, Jesus Christ was a healer, was doing these things, was using certain techniques that have been lost to modern science to heal people, and all of this other stuff appears like it may just be added in there as like poisoning the well with lies. Because, frankly, if you look at Genesis, for example, which I don't believe the Old Testament was tampered with. If you look at Genesis, um, it says right there that the earth is fixed and immovable. And, for modern science to come out and prove the ball with NASA and all these lies, it does go right in the face of all teachings, all religious holy teachings, and that's not just Christianity. It's Muslim, Buddhist, even religions that you've never heard of all know this. And it really it is the signature of modern science to come in and wreck all of these belief systems that are really, I believe, at their core, uh, very important and good for humanity. And when you take that sort of thing away and mock it and you get generations like we have today in America and all across the world. So yeah, a little bit of a hot one today. YouTube community guideline strike is over. Scientism in modern culture. So we see, you know, scientism just everywhere. Medicine, drugs in the DEA. And let's talk about marijuana, for example. This is a highly powerful medicine that has virtually no side effects, is not addictive, and just does wonders for all sorts of things. And of course, that is branded as illegal in the early 1900s, really for corporate greed. You've got these rich corporations that come out with synthetic fabrics, and synthetic fuel sources, or like non-renewable fuel sources, synthetic fibers like nylon, I think was one of them. And hemp has just so many uses that they had to make it illegal so that they wouldn't have that natural and cheap competition for their synthetic stuff. And, you know, today it's federally, and maybe there's been some laws passed recently, but it's, you know, it's illegal even for scientific researchers to use cannabinoids in medical research or other research, whether it's synthetic or, you know, hemp-made fibers. Or I think it was Henry Ford literally built a car and fueled it completely out of hemp. So strengthened hemp is like 10 times stronger than steel and lighter. And you can make just all kinds of stuff from it: soaps, butters. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's not just medicine, or it's not just a recreational drug. I mean, it's so many things that would it would make it so that American citizens were not reliant upon these large offshore corporations to import these cheap synthetic items, whether it's clothes or anything. If hemp had been legal, or if pot had been legal this whole time, I don't believe that the money cartel or the Federal Reserve scam could have been able to grow as it did. Because as we can see in sort of the death throes, where this whole beast system has sort of multiplied all around the world, but the death throes of the old world system of the Federal Reserve, where it was confined really to the United States, and only by proxy did it have sort of its mitts in other countries. But now that we have this sort of globalization in the last few decades, where practically all of the American cotton mills and any sort of manufacturing plants, and just any sort of business where goods are actually made en masse, 90% of that stuff has evaporated and gone overseas. And so, you know, we see scientism in the Federal Reserve scam. This is another huge point where we've got scientism affecting modern culture to the degree where the Federal Reserve, and I'm actually, I started recording audiobook for The Creature from Jekyll Island. I've got the first couple chapters recorded. And it's just a really excellent book that most people don't understand what the Federal Reserve System is. They don't understand how it makes them a slave. And they get away with it by putting all of these abstract and confusing algorithms to explain what the Federal Reserve is and how it works. But the fact of the matter is, it is a scam. I mean, it literally is a independent, non-governmental group of people, rich people to begin with. 25% of the world's wealth was allegedly in that hotel on Jekyll Island in the early 1900s, when they penned the Federal Reserve Act in secret on Jekyll Island in the Christmas holidays. 25% of the world's wealth was represented by those few men in that single train car that went to the damn resort. So these guys, these super rich guys that didn't want any sort of competition, penned the Federal Reserve Act to look like it was sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing. They penned it to look like something that was going to benefit the public and be a good thing for our economy. But in fact, it was deceptively created for the exact opposite means. It was created to prevent any sort of competition for this small group of men. Warburg, I think the Rockefellers were represented, Morgan, J.P. Morgan. These few people had literally, allegedly, according to these sources in the book, so don't talk to me, talk to what's his name? J. Edward Griffin. Talk to him, but a quarter of the world's wealth was represented there. And so the Federal Reserve is something where they're literally, these rich people have the ability to create wealth out of thin air, loan it to the government with interest. So how do you create wealth from thin air, loan it, and then pay back wealth that never existed with interest? That is absurd. It is a scam. And only Congress and really the states themselves individually should have the right to issue their own currency. And yet scientism in political engineering has allowed for this totally ridiculous scam of a system to be what is running the show in terms of the largest economy in the history of the world, the United States. And now that system, has in the last couple decades has branched out all across the world. And scientism and greed are not a good combination, because these people who use, they hide behind complex math and long abstract theories that, never get an explanation, but are just taken for granted as a fact, and force that belief system, this theoretical belief system, on everyone else so that they can profit from it and benefit basically off the backs of slave labor. If you look at the value of the dollar since the Federal Reserve was implemented, it has inflated 1,000% and is now less than 5% of what it used to be worth. So where does all that money go? Where does 95% of a dollar go in 100 years of every single dollar? And the answer is it goes back into this system. And frankly, all of our tax dollars, all of the tax dollars that the government collects annually doesn't even cover the interest on the loans that the Federal Reserve scam has loaned to the federal government. Now, by inflation, and what that means is basically diluting the money supply by watering it down with extra money, they're basically stealing our wealth. The value of a gold coin doesn't change really over time. A gold coin is going to hold a certain amount of value, and that value is stable over time. But when you've got this fiat currency of the dollar supported by scientism, it's supported by nothing but faith in the currency's ability to be accepted as tender. So scientism allows for things like pot to be illegalized, and lots of good innocent people to be put in jail for years for having a plant that is harmless medicine and was actually required by law by the founding fathers to grow. If they had land, they had to grow hemp because it is just so useful for practically everything. Such an innocent thing now becomes a crime where you sit next to literal rapists and murderers in a cell for having a plant, a harmless medicinal plant on your possession or in your house. And frankly, they can do a lot worse than that. They can take your house, they can take your cars, they can take all your money and say that it was drug money if you get caught with a certain, felony possession of even pot. Now, granted, that is going away, sort of, and I do remember hearing something recently, federal level legislation either being passed or in the process of being passed to make it at least legal for certain research and medicinal purposes. But what an awful, awful thing, in the so-called greatest country in the world ever, America. You're literally putting innocent people to jail for having the wrong kind of salad in their pocket. And why is that supported? By scientism and propaganda. Whole generations of people were affected by the same sort of Let me know if I'm still live, because I just got a thing from my, yeah, I guess I am still live. I'm watching it here, duh. All right, sorry. So, well, I lost my train of thought there, but of course, my little web plug-in thing, the router thing, gave me a check. So when sometimes when it does that, it just totally craps the internet out altogether. So totally lost my train of thought, but yeah, so okay, scientism, and we all know scientism in education. I mean, they're the worst preachers of scientism of anyone. And of course, not saying that any of the teachers that we had in our education were, purposely deceiving us, because of course they are products of that same system as well. And when you're a finished product of this beast system of deception, you become very ingrained or entrenched into the deception. It becomes a part of who you are, at least in your own mind. And so it becomes very difficult for people that are products of this education system to introspectively, look at the world, examine things, not just take NASA's word for it, entertain the notion that NASA might be completely full of crap, entertain the notion that theoretical physics might be absolutely fundamentally wrong, starting with the Big Bang, entertain the notion that all theoretical sciences, from the speed of light to the atomic theory to nuclear bomb hoax, all of these things need to be revisited with a skeptical, critical eye, because simply taking people's words who have a vested interest in propagating a system that they have helped to create in many cases, it's just one of those things that, 100 years from now, if a clinical psychologist were to look at the state of modern Western civilization right now, they'd be like, good God, those people were deceived. Like, talk about mass delusion. You've got this entire world full of people who believe they live on a spinning ball and will literally fight with you if you try to tell them the contrary and prove the contrary. And I mentioned the nuclear hoax. That's something that, it's scientism and propaganda. That they show people images and animations or videos, looks like scale model videos to me, of these nuclear bombs. And frankly, what they're doing is they're lighting off tons and tons and tons of dynamite, and they're cutting that in a video, a propaganda video, to make it look like they dropped that from a plane and convince people that it was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. And from that point forward, scientism and propaganda have paraded this nuclear ability around and used it to a great extent for this whole mind control operation that's been going on for our entire lives. So the question is, when it comes to these large hoaxes that have been going on since long before we were born, the problem with that is people don't live infinitely. People, live and die with their generation. And so how can, this is what a normal, normie, in the matrix rational person needs to ask themselves once coming into contact with this truth. And sometimes this is just too difficult. They need to ask themselves, is it possible that all of this stuff was just absolute nonsense, and it was created to some extent for mind control? Now, who is able to perpetuate something like that? It can't be an individual. It can't be someone who's going to live and die with their generation. It's going to have to be a group of people with long sort of facility to implement their goals. And frankly, you've got these secret societies like Freemasonry and many others that are, I believe, the ones responsible for pushing the scientism, pushing the propaganda, and pushing the entire belief system. And yet they are literally revered in our history because, you know, they created these documents which bind us to their, you know, man's laws, at least in their minds. I never signed any of those contracts, but scientism does a lot to completely and utterly fool people and control people into basically being subservient slaves to the beast system that culminates in the very money that we spend. I mean, all of this stuff is connected because, frankly, it's just a very small group of people that are in the reins of this power structure. And of course, you know, their symbology is the unfinished pyramid, the capless pyramid, because they like to believe that they're above us and not able to be caught. When you have an unfinished pyramid at the top, it's like, well, where's the power? Where's the head of this power structure at the top of the pyramid? Oh, it either doesn't exist or it's elevated above the rest of it. And you know, that's their symbology, that's their line of thinking. And anybody who continues supporting scientism, whether they're willfully trolling or whether they're just simply refusing to look, you know, revisit themselves and their beliefs and the fundamental things like this, you know, the spinning ball Earth and fluoride in the water. And the fact of the matter is, yes, there are government entities that are capable of being not only wrong, but deceptive, not only passively violent to the people, but intentionally violent to the people. And when you come to terms with that, then you know that's a very slippery slope for some people, especially if your career or your entire life is sort of intertwined with this belief system. Or if your career or your, you know, the things that you do in your life have no room for flat earthers in them. And there's a lot of social situations where, you know, that is definitely the case. Arguing about it amongst the campfire. I won't even tell that story. It's an awful story. But there was a survey. Look at my survey video from recently, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Right. So let's see here. What was I going to talk about? So nuclear host. Oh, refraction. So yeah, let me. Oh, I know where I put it. Sorry, bear with me. Right. So yeah. So refraction. Um, the entire globe Earth theory. This is what they claim. You know, these are their claims. Was created by, well, let's say first it would be Eratosthenes, who allegedly measured the circumference by measuring the you know, the shadow angles in Syene and Alexandria. That experiment was done before refraction was known. And even things like Columbus, even, you know, more relatively speaking, Columbus's assertion that distant ships going away from the observer go down a curve, that was also done prior to the understanding of refraction. And so when you're, oh, let me mute this guy, I'm hearing him in my headset. When you're dealing with these pre-refraction so-called evidences of the globe Earth, all that they really show is that the assumption of these so-called scientists or these observers was wrong. The assumption that light always travels in straight lines is wrong. And now, you know, now that we know about refraction and say that it's 100 years following Christopher Columbus when refraction is discovered, it appears that, you know, the globes had already been made for 100 years. They were selling globes, and, you know, I don't know exactly what point it was decided, and maybe some further research is needed, but I don't know exactly what point it was decided to teach the globe Earth hypothesis in all classrooms starting as early as possible. But, you know, if you read some books like Zetetic Astronomy from the mid 1800s, it was definitely going on in Rowbotham's era. It was being shoved down the throats of the youngsters, according to that book. So it's safe to say that once Columbus and was it Magellan did the whole circumnavigation thing, and then they started actually making globes, physical globe Earth, little models that you can carry around with you and convince people of the ball Earth. At that point, when refraction was discovered, perhaps maybe there was some revisit into the whole idea of ships going over a curve, or even Eratosthenes' value, but maybe not. Maybe it was never revisited. But now that we know about refraction and apply just physical experiment, which that's what science is a physical experiment. When you apply science to light and new technologies to visualize light, it becomes clear that light does absolutely not travel in straight lines. And so the foundational assumption by these pillars, cornerstone arguments of the globe, fall to pieces, because their fundamental assumption of light not, being prone to wobbling or bending or whatever, is wrong. Because we know for a fact that as light travels through different temperatures, density, media, it's going to do peculiar things that we might otherwise not expect. And yet, science is not applied to these arguments. When we know about refraction and we have the ability to prove what's actually going on with Christopher Columbus's ships, and so we get people like this guy here. Oh God, I can't stand him. Who goes on and on about this this picture of the Earth curvature, and clearly this is nothing more than perspective and refraction. But they're not going to admit that. They're going to say that this is these, whatever they are, power lines or whatever on Lake Pontchartrain, are actually going around a curve. And it's just ridiculous. It's refraction, it's perspective, and it doesn't have anything to do with those objects going down a curve. But it's exactly that sort of scientism that people will use in order to allow for the continuation of the belief system, even though there's so much evidence to the contrary. That they'll take one picture that was deceptively made, let's just say, and cherry picked out of other potential still frames that were not so convincing. And that isn't science. That's pseudoscience. It's scientism. And people will say, okay, scientism in the American Dental Association allowing for fluoride in the water supply, 90% of municipal water supplies in America. That's scientism affecting people. NASA wasting billions of dollars a year, probably trillions or hundreds of billions at least over their life. That's scientism affecting people negatively because they're wasting our money. But scientism in the curve of the Earth, like why would anyone lie about this? Why, what's the motive to make up such an absurd thing? And quite frankly, the answer is it's not important to prove a motive, because we know that the Earth is flat and stationary, so there must be some motive. But at the end of the day, it ties back to what I was originally saying, that it has to do with mind control. If you believe in one thing and yet that cannot be believed, so if you believe the Earth to be a spinning ball, but yet your senses and everything natural tells you it's not, then you're in a good position to be mind controlled. If you're told, I don't know, to believe that the moon is 250,000 miles away, you will believe that. And especially when that's done during certain formative years of our lives. And so the big problem with, I believe, the whole round Earth nonsense is to sort of prime the pump, as it were, for this other continuous, repetitious mind control programming going on through the mainstream media. And again, the end result of that being to turn people into basically subservient, non-aggressive, emasculated slaves that will not even question their surroundings or their milieu or any deception or treachery or inequity that goes on around them, as long as it doesn't affect their belief system. Then they're not going to. They don't want it. They don't want anything that's going to affect their belief system because it's too comfortable, and that's a big problem. So culture-wide, I mean, look at it. It really brings me back to the Matrix 1 movie. I mean, I probably use that analogy too much because that movie's so dated, but I thought it was a great movie when it came out, and I still do. When Neo goes into the Matrix for the first time, actually, and he's just sort of looking out the window of the car at all of these people who are literally, their physical bodies are submerged in a vat of pink goo with all these little tubes attached to their spines and their arms, and in their minds they're having these great dreams about whatever their life is, but all of it is just a facade. It's just a deception in order to make them a battery for this system that keeps them enslaved. um, the analogy there is perfect, because that's really, without the pink goo and perhaps without the pipes attached to the spine or whatever, that's pretty much exactly what's going on with the globe earth lie. It puts people, if you don't even know what the hell the ground is that you're walking on, then how in the hell could you know anything else for sure, especially when it comes to theoretical things that science purports, whether that's atomic theory or the nuclear bomb or you name it, the speed of light, the spin of the earth. It's absurd scientism that has taken advantage of the minds of people culture-wide, that we have to come to terms with. But to simply plug your ears and close your eyes and bury your head in the sand is not is not going to change anything ever. And this system isn't going away. It's not like the people who are at the reins of this beast system are just going to eventually die off one generation. Well, I suppose they would at some point. Not anytime soon, it would appear. And so we have to oppose it. And we have to at least be open-minded enough to consider the notion or consider the possibility that, yes, it is possible that there is a shadow element of government. Really, I would say the CIA and other alphabet soup sort of agencies are definitely not looking out for the public interest, and yet we allow them to basically leech off of us, leech our energy, our time, our money, by deceiving most everybody and mind controlling them into subservient slavery. And I guess subservient slavery in the Matrix does have its perks, right? I guess you can eat a good steak in there, right? But at the end of the day, the deception is that's why I believe it's so insidious, more so insidious than even per se fluoride in the water. Perhaps the fluoride in the water allows for them to get over on us that much more easily, because apparently what it does is it will make people more docile, and over time, evidence suggests that it's building up in your system. You're not metabolizing it. It's difficult to throw it off, and it's basically slow poisoning us. But in the meantime, it makes us subservient. So throw them some beer and circus, and people are cool with it. Right. So, I wanted to talk about this London hammer And it came on the heels of I recently watched Wakey Wakey's relatively recent video, geological video. If you haven't checked that out yet, definitely check it out. I thought it was great on the Wakey channel. I'll try to find a link and put it in the show notes. But anyway, I came across this thing, and you guys have probably heard of it before, but it's called the London Hammer, and it was found in London, Texas, not London, England. But the London Hammer, how do I make it go? What am I doing here? It's funny because, well, that's not good, you stupid thing. Can't hit the play button. There. Oh, you. Oh, hell. There. Good God. Right. So the London Hammer, it's made out of iron and wood, and they found it's, looks like kind of like dried lava to me, but they found it in this stone, that the stone was dated to be 400 million years old. And so scientists are unable to reconcile this because they can date the rock to 400 million years, wink, wink, and it doesn't match their timeline about how long, modern humans have been on the scene on Earth. And so there's all these wild theories about, oh, maybe it's evidence of ancient aliens, and maybe it's evidence of a pre-human civilization that was around 400 million years ago. Or what I would say is maybe they're not so good at dating the rock. And again, that goes back to what Wakey Wakey had mentioned and did a real good job of illustrating in his video, that there's a scientist, and I forget his name, so just maybe I'll try to find the link and put it in the description. I didn't have it prepped, but I just sort of thought of this as I was telling about this hammer, London Hammer. The idea that coal forms over millions of years cannot be true. And I'll leave it to the scientist to explain why, but it actually made logical sense. It didn't seem like it was this theoretical scientism. It was fairly sound science as far as I could tell. And it shows that the whole idea behind dating rocks and their estimates of how that works is it couldn't be correct. And I think this is just another example. What this looks like to me, I don't know what it is, but what it looks like to me is you had some like lava flow that had started to cool and harden up a bit, or maybe in the water, cooling and hardening in the water, or long time over land. And somehow or another, this hammer obviously got lodged or dropped into it, and it wasn't fully submerged. And so, when that occurred, how could you ever know? Who knows? If it was newer than, say something that we find on the Hawaiian shores, then that would be something. But as far as I know, how are they dating this rock to 400 million years? I guess they'll put into it several things, like how deep did they find it, what other sort of rocks are surrounding it or above it, because they have that geological record that, the deeper you go, they know exactly what layer you're in, so they know exactly what year it is. But when you run into things like this, and when you run into evidence that was discussed on Wakey Wakey's video, it really just flies in the face of the scientism of these people who parade themselves around as the smartest people in the world because they know what was going on 400 million years ago. And it's just absolutely ridiculous, because people have not been studying the natural world for even 0.01 million years. So for them to say that by the process of deduction and theory, that they're able to date things like this stone, and how they're going to get, how are you ever going to verify, like what metric do you have to verify that 400 million years is even a roundabout accurate ballpark correct? Which I don't think that it is. I think that's absurd. But again, it goes to show how even, you know, very smart geologists are prone to this particular thread of scientism, because frankly, the globe Earth alliance theoretical astrophysics permeates lots of forms of theoretical sciences, probably all of them, because everything in that theoretical scientist's universe must be happening on a spinning ball Earth. And anything else that goes to the contrary of that, like perhaps the Earth is a dielectric plane, a capacitor plate, or the ionosphere is like the other part of the mechanism. To even entertain such an idea is heresy to theoretical alliance, and you'll be laughed out of a room if you try to have that sort of a discussion with anybody who is completely brainwashed by the Masonic degree educational beast system. And so this one was just another great example. Again, that's the London hammer, London, Texas. So yeah, 400 million year old rock. My ass. Give me a break. Okay, so what else did I have? I had something else. No, I did that. Oh, right. So I was going to talk about refraction earlier, and I wanted to read this because one of the main things that I wanted to talk about was the dome situation. Because I just watched another video yesterday, and you see this all the time now. People saying that several things prove the dome, and the two of the biggest things are rainbows and the Go Fast rocket launch, right? So we'll do these. We'll do the Go Fast rocket launch first. So the Go Fast rocket launch, I'm not going to play the video here because I will get a copyright strike for that, but I'll scroll through some pictures. The Go Fast rocket launch is pretty famous. It goes up, I think, 70 miles, I want to say. I'm just doing this from the seat of my pants. But what happens is it goes straight up and it spins like crazy. And then what is claimed by these people, flat earthers, God love them, is claimed that the thing hits the dome and then hits the dome again, I think. Okay, and here's a screenshot of it here. You've probably seen it. I've put it on a couple videos, but even if you just use like 5 seconds of it, you get a flag and a copyright strike. So not going to do it. What happens is you've got in the nose of that rocket, it's a de-spinning mechanism, and it's basically like a yo-yo tied to a cylinder that is in line, you know, in the center of and in line with the rocket. And once that thing gets up to a certain altitude, because the spinning of it when it's going through the atmosphere, it's a stabilization, makes it more stable, right? Because you get that gyroscopic stability. But once it gets to a certain altitude, they're up there to observe and take pictures, and so they want it to stop spinning. And so that's exactly what they do. There's a de-spinning mechanism on the inside, and you can clearly hear it. Kind of makes like a, I don't know, like a hydraulic lever noise. Pew! And then it releases its primary thruster. You can see it clearly, boom, all these little brackets pop off the sides of it, and the primary boost thruster, whatever the hell it is released. It's decoupled. And so those are the two noises that you hear. You hear the de-spin mechanism, pew, and then the primary rocket booster decoupling, pong. But you've still got people to this day, flat earthers, God love them, that are saying that that's proof that the rocket hit the dome. And it's absolute, as far as I'm concerned, it's nonsense. Frankly, if the rocket hit anything solid like a dome at the frickin' reads at the frickin' speeds that this thing was going, it would have been obliterated. It would have fallen apart, exploded, been shattered to smithereens. But it doesn't stop. It isn't obliterated. It merely stops spinning when the D-spin mechanism is kicked into effect, and then it releases that primary thruster to, I guess, drop some of the weight. I don't know why they would do that, but it certainly didn't run into anything. And frankly, I don't care whether there's a dome or not. If there's a dome, great. If there's not, fine. It has no bearing on the flat Earth whatsoever. But a lot of people want to point to the Bible and say the firmament is proof that there's a dome. But if you look at the etymology and the translations of that, that's debatable, because the words they use appear to say expanse as opposed to anything firm and solid. But I'm sorry, misunderstanding a video like the Go Fast rocket and then calling that evidence of a dome to support the Bible, to me, is just as bad a pseudoscience as what the Globers are doing. And I really hate to see, flat Earth proponents, God love them, doing the pseudoscience the way that the old school theoreticalists did the pseudoscience, because it's unbecoming of a flat earther. And I think that the Go Fast rocket is a really good example of how we can't let our beliefs betray our senses. We can't be looking for evidence of a dome so that everything we see looks like evidence of a dome, which brings me to the next point, rainbows. So it's claimed by the domers, and I don't even know if this is something that's a real grassroots part of the flat Earth so-called community or movement, or whether this is some sort of a disinformation campaign. Because again, what this adversary does is, instead of outright fighting things or killing them, it will co-opt them and start adding little bits of deception and lies into the narrative of that grassroots movement. And to the end of the day, when somebody sees, a veteran of the grassroots movement that has never heard of the grassroots movement, a lot of times there's so much fiction and decidedly untrue things involved that it's a shell, or it's a shadow of its former self. And so, again, I don't claim to know whether there's a dome or not, and I don't care whether there is or not. And my faith in Christ, or the Bible, is not going to be affected by whether or not there's a dome. But to look for evidence of a dome and start making things up like the Go Fast rocket hit the dome when it clearly did not, it's absolutely not what happened. But it does muddy the waters of the discussion, and it makes flat Earth proponents appear to be either gullible or deceptive. And again, I don't know which it is, but this is just my 2 cents on the Go Fast rocket so-called evidence of a dome. Now, I do believe there's very good evidence that we have a dome-like magnetic field that is some altitude up, and I would not be surprised if that magnetic field was toroidal in shape and ultimately like a hemisphere above us. I would not be surprised, but that is a far cry from a physical crystalline dome structure. Right. So the other thing was rainbows. They say that you must have 2 polarizers of light in order to get rainbows. So like if you squirt a hose up inside your house with a light bulb, you won't get rainbows, but if you have 2 polarizers, you will. And so that that begs the question, if light is being polarized twice to form rainbows outside, does that prove that there is some sort of physical crystalline dome structure? Or does it prove that there are 2 polarizers? And what is a polarizer of light? What does polarized light mean? So, pardon me, this might get a bit boring. I'm going to read from this, but it really is a point that has to be made, because polarized light isn't all that fancy or complicated. You can get polarized light either reflecting off or passing through a variety of mediums or contraptions, whether it's water or highways or the sky itself, like the good old Batman symbol when you shine the spotlight up at the clouds, the sky reflects light. The sky reflects light. Let me drink some lemonade. Bear with me. Ah, that's good. Right. So sunlight, and next time I guess I'll mute myself when I'm drinking. Sorry, guys. Sunlight in almost every. Oh, and this article is by is from microscopyu.com. Introduction to polarized light. So sunlight and almost every other form of natural and artificial illumination produces light waves whose electric field vectors vibrate in all planes that are perpendicular with respect to the direction of propagation. If the electric field vectors are restricted to a single plane by filtration of the beam with specialized materials, then the light is referred to as plane or linearly polarized with respect to the direction of propagation. And all waves vibrating in a single plane are termed plane parallel or plane polarized. So, the human eye lacks the ability to distinguish between randomly oriented and polarized light. The plane polarized light can only be detected through an intensity or color effect, for example, by reduced glare when wearing polarized sunglasses. In effect, humans cannot differentiate between the high contrast real images observed in a polarized light microscope and identical images of the same specimens captured digitally or on film and then projected onto a screen with light that is not polarized. The basic concept of polarized light is illustrated in Figure 1, it's right here, for a non-polarized beam of light incident on two linear polarizers. Electric field vectors are depicted in the incident light beam as sinusoidal waves or curvy waves vibrating in all directions, 360 degrees, although only 6 waves spaced at 60-degree intervals are included in the figure. In reality, the incident light electric field vectors are vibrating perpendicular to the direction of propagation with an equal distribution in all planes before encountering the first polarizer. So that was pretty boring. I think I highlighted some stuff because maybe I didn't intend to read all that. I don't want to bore you guys to actual death. So let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so moving along. Polarized light can be produced from the common physical processes that deviate light beams, including absorption, refraction, reflection, diffraction, or scattering, and the process known as birefringence, the property of double refraction. Light that is reflected from the flat surface of a dielectric or insulating material is often partially polarized, with the electric vectors of the reflected light vibrating in a plane that is parallel to the surface of the material. Common examples of surfaces that reflect polarized light are undisturbed water, glass, sheet plastics, and highways. In these instances, light waves that have the electric field vectors parallel to the surface are reflected to a greater degree than those with different orientations. The optical properties of the insulating surface determine the exact amount of reflected light that is polarized. Mirrors are not good polarizers, although a wide spectrum of transparent materials act as very good polarizers, but only if the incident light angle is oriented within certain limits. An important property of reflected polarized light is that the degree of polarization is dependent upon the incident angle of light, with increasing amounts of polarization being observed for decreasing incident angles. So, I think the big point is that anything can be a polarizer. And in fact, if there were some, and I would say anything, including the atmosphere itself, the sky, can be a polarizer. The thing is, if you were to have, say, a crystalline solid dome structure, whatever, 3,000 miles high or whatever it is, the sky would prevent light from being polarized from that to reaching all the way down to your eye. You know, you can't see the stars during the day because you've got the blue atmosphere in your way. So the light bouncing around off of the ground, highways, the ground can be a polarizer, and the sky. There's your two polarizers. My damn cigarette keeps going out. Sorry, but you don't need a dome. You don't need a physical structure to be a polarizer. It's the sky that's doing that. And so, like, I guess my argument would be, even if there were a dome, I don't believe it would be sufficient to act as a polarizer to create rainbows, because the sky already has that covered. And you don't get rainbows all the time, but when the light from the sun is hitting the ground in the sky at a certain angle, you get that polarization. And so you get that giant rainbow. I saw a beautiful one a couple months ago. I was forget what I was doing. I went over to my mom's and I was leaving. No, that's right. I waited on the bus and I went over to my mother's, and I saw this huge, complete 180-degree rainbow. It wasn't just like the end of it. It was like a semicircle, huge, beautiful one. But again, the point is that natural phenomenon doesn't need a dome. It needs two polarizers. And that polarizer can be anything virtually that reflects light at a certain angle. Okay, depending on the angle of the sunlight and the conditions on the ground, it will sometimes produce rainbows. So there's your two polarizers. You don't have to have a dome. So, again, I'm not an advocate for or against a dome, but I just personally have never seen evidence for a dome. And interpreting things like the Go Fast rocket or rainbows, and it's sort of confirmation bias at its finest. You're finding, and really globe Earth theoretical alliance at its finest does the same exact thing. It's cherry picking things that that jive well with your paradigm if you misinterpret them. So if you misinterpret things in order to jive with your paradigm and then call that science or evidence or proof of something, again, is just exactly what the globe Earth lie got into doing. Because anytime you run into a problem with the globe Earth, whether it's I don't know, the shadow of the moon decreasing in angular size, or the whole gravitational what is the damn phrase where we only ever see one face of the moon, and tidal locking. That's right, tidal locking. So anytime that the globe Earth theory has problems with it, the sun and the moon are the same size apparently. All these different things, they come up with long theoretical premises to match their theory, and then go into the world looking for things that match their theory, whether they actually match or not, and forcing that into proof of their paradigm. So, like, it's just sad to me when you see flat Earth proponents getting caught up in this, promoting the dome, because of, these are two of the biggest points of evidence I've ever seen for the dome. You also knows that they've got pictures of it, which I think is absurd. But I don't know. It just kind of makes me uneasy, because I don't know whether it's flat earthers being completely gullible, or if the people promoting that sort of evidence have been deceived or are deceivers. Right. So moving right along, what was I going to talk about here? Yeah, I already talked about Bart Sibrel. Okay, good. I covered pretty much everything I wanted to. The last thing I just wanted to sort of close out with was the now culture, and it's something that it's kind of another one of these unnerving things. People are always looking for the newest thing, whether it's, let's say, social media. We'll use the social media realm. And I guess I can stop sharing now. Anything that's 6 months old or a year old, or God forbid 2 years old, it seems to be like it is purposefully, systematically ignored by many. And I don't expect everyone to be a historian, right? That's probably not possible to be a good historian on so many things, but at least we shouldn't be forgetful, because there is sort of a push in modern culture to you got to put something up new. People are always looking for the new thing, and if it's a week old or 2 weeks or God forbid a year, then it's old. And that's a big problem, because the old adage, if you forget about history, you're doomed to repeat it. Basically, history repeats itself. And God, I mean, apply that, because I take that as a fact. If you forget the past, if you forget about the history of things, then people are people. People will always be people, and they are prone or doomed to repeat the same mistakes that their predecessors have made, if we don't learn from those past mistakes. And so when you have this systematic drive towards the absolute now culture that we have in 2018, it's a bit frightening, because if people can't even focus on 6 months ago, and if anything's more than a year old, it's old news and we don't need to even consider it. I'm not talking about you guys. I'm talking about those who are still, sitting in the vat of pink goo. History is doomed to repeat itself if we forget it. So, I just don't find it as any surprise that the culture has gone at the pace that it has towards, are people really like that? Or is this a result of mind control programming? Are people really prone to forgetting what happened? I don't, if it's 2 weeks old, I don't want it. I got to have something new. Is that how people really are, or have we been manipulated into that sort of a cultural sort of milieu, right? I don't know. I mean, perhaps there is some degree of control involved there, or perhaps it is just a natural neurological response to living in this sort of technological age that we have. But I just think it's important that we don't forget the mistakes of the past, and that goes really, I think, for within our own lives. I mean, God, could you imagine if you didn't remember your mistakes? If you just kept making all the same mistakes every day? And frankly, unfortunately, that's what a lot of people are doing, especially when it comes to being deceived by all these different mechanisms that are ultimately in place to control our minds into being subservient slaves, and not complaining about it. So, I just hope and pray that enough of us are waking up and enough of us are awake that we're going to be able to make real lasting change in this system, so that future generations do not have to go through the subliminal mind control programming. And maybe 100 years from now, there will be some clinical psychologist that does a case study on the humans of the early 21st century, because I really hope that person is going to be able to write something that says, man, thank God for the flat earth movement. Thank God that the entire world wasn't being deceived about the damn ground itself, the world itself, and nature not being this infinite vacuum of space. I really hope that that they're not saying something like, well, the size of the sun is 93 million miles away, and it's 800,000 miles in diameter, and it's atomic fusion going on. I really hope that's not the case. I hope that the truth is able to make its way into institutional education systems and that sort of thing. So, and I think that's possible. I mean, perhaps we won't see any real effective change in that regard in our lifetimes, but hopefully, within sometime soon, the truth has to prevail over the deception. I mean, I just don't think that it's possible for them to put this truth back in the bag, especially not with all the flat earthers that are so passionate about getting this truth out there, and preventing the matrix from consuming future generations. So about to wrap it up, guys. As you know, the channel is viewer supported. So if you'd like to contribute, www.paypal.me/TheMorgile or www.patreon.com/TheMorgile. Thanks so much, guys. God bless you all. Love you guys. And as always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody.